episode 29 of the Treatment Room Secrets podcast, and I'm super happy to have Mr. Anson Dorrance here. Albert Anson Dorrance, right? But please, yeah.
Yeah, actually, it's Albert Anson Dorrance the fourth, if you want to be incredibly formal.
All right.
I was named after my uncle, who was named after his father. So if you want to be completely thorough, I'm the fourth in a line of Albert Ansons, yeah.
So we will in your bio, but you go by Anson.
Yeah, I hate Albert. I think that's a very pompous name. So I prefer Anson. I think it's unique. And my mother's name was Margaret Ann, so I'm son of Ann, Ann's son. So I think that sort of checks all the boxes for me.
What do your players refer to you as, coach?
Now, Anson, when I was hired so young here, I was hired to coach the men when I was 23. And I was coaching guys I played with. And you know this, I mean, you played the game. I mean, how can you go from one day, they're calling you by your actual name, and then they've got to call you coach? No. So that never made sense to me. So I started coaching the men. These are guys I played with. So, it was always Anson. And then when I was given a women's team, it's a lot more personal of a connection. And so obviously with the women, that was more important. In fact, they hated me calling them by their last names. So I guess the deal we struck is, okay, Susan Ellis, I won't call you Ellis anymore. I'll call you Susan. And then, yeah, please call me Anson. So that was.
So you started with the men's team. And when you played here, so we're sitting here we're in Chapel Hill, by the way. We're in the UNC's campus, sitting in this, whoever's not watching the video, we're sitting in this beautiful room surrounded by at least 20 NCAA trophies, right? So 21 NCAA trophies?
I haven't counted them recently, but unless one was stolen, yeah, we should have 21 NCAA trophies in here, but we actually have 22 national championship trophies, because originally the NCAA didn't sponsor women's sports.
Mm-hmm.
So originally the first organization that sponsored the women was the Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women. So the first national championship we won was not an NCAA championship, because they didn't sponsor women's championships. And so the first one was an AIAW championship. So, and I can see that one. That's actually, we call it the Naked Lady Trophy, because that was the trophy they gave all of the championships in women's sports back in the day. And actually, that's not a championship trophy. That's an individual trophy. One of the girls stole the national championship trophy. We still haven't discovered who it was. So if you're out there listening to this, please bring the trophy back. We would love it back for the trophy room. So please, and we won't, have the police attack you. Just please return the trophy.
So you went to school here. You played soccer here?
Yeah, loved it. Played for Dr. Marvin Allen, a wonderful gentleman that I just thoroughly respected. And actually, the only reason I got the job here is because when he stepped back, he went in and suggested to the athletic director, Mr. Bill Kobe, that he hire me to succeed him.
Behind your back?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't interested. I never had any ambitions to coach. My dad was starting his own oil company. He wanted me to be his corporate attorney. So the family humor at the time was, if I was the corporate attorney, at least I wouldn't have a tendency to steal from my own estate. So that was my dad's sense of humor. And I loved my father. I was a dutiful son, so I went to law school for him. But this opportunity to coach the men gave me an income. Wasn't much of an income, but it was a bit of an income to help me pay for my progression through law school. So I agreed to coach the men just for income. No ambitions, no long-term plans to remain as a coach, and then fell in love with it. Just fell in love with coaching. Couldn't believe how much I enjoyed it.
Were you in love with the game before you were in love with coaching?
I'm in love with competition. I want to beat everyone to death in absolutely everything. And the process of beating people to death in anything for me is endlessly fascinating. Soccer was one of the sports I played. In fact, it was the only varsity sport I played here, although I was on the rugby team. But while I was an undergraduate here, I just played every intramural sport that the university offered, because I just love sport. So for me, I'd be disingenuous if I sat here and told you I was really in love with soccer. Yeah, I liked it. I was pretty good at it. But for me, everything was about competing. So for me, the attraction into anything I played was to, okay, let's see if I can figure out a way to beat you with this.
What position did you play?
My freshman year, I started at right back for St. Mary's University in San Antonio, Texas. And then in my junior, well, actually my sophomore year, back in those days when you transferred schools like I did from St. Mary's University into the University of North Carolina, you were obligated to sit out a year. So in the modern culture, transfers are constant, and also you don't have to sit.
Yeah.
Back in those days, you had to sit. So I transferred in here, sat a year, and actually that's the year I started playing rugby more or less full time. Although I was training with the men's soccer team, and then that next year I was an inside forward in a 1-3-3-4. So back in those
You're
days,
speaking Chinese to me.
yeah. Oh, back in those days, you played not with a flat back, you played with a diagonal defense. And so the sweeper back in a back three was if the ball was coming up the left side, you would have the left back pressuring the ball. You'd have the center back sitting underneath at a diagonal, and you'd have the right back way back here. So if a ball was knocked through, this right back had to run all the way over as like the sweeper and sort of mop up. So this is back in the old, 1-3-3-4 days. And so during that stretch of that year, I was an inside forward. So you'd have 4 people across the front line, obviously wingers on the sidelines. You'd have sometimes high-low, so a 9 and basically a 10. And sometimes you'd have, east-west, so basically twin 9. So I was basically a twin 9
But at the time, it obviously made sense.
Yeah, at the time, all this stuff made sense. Of course, looking back, you're thinking, gosh, none of this stuff makes sense. But yeah, and then my final 2 years, I was a center halfback in a 1-3-3-4. A center halfback is in effect a stopper back. It's a 6. It's a 6 that sits on top of the 3. And that's where I felt most comfortable. My qualities were I could head, I could tackle, I could run all day, I could pass the ball. So the 6, basically the center halfback in a 1-3-3-4 was probably my best position.
So you're on the pitch playing these different positions. You want to beat everyone you're playing against to death. You want to do well. You want to figure out a way to beat the other teams and win. Was it frustrating that you're 1 of 11 or 1 of 25 on a team? Because as a coach, like you are now and have been for many decades, you can implement your way because you're trying to figure out a way that your team can beat the others to death. But when you're just one part of a larger chain, how did you feel about it then?
I've always loved any kind of game, whether it's, a one-on-one game or a team game. And I love team sports. I mean, I love hanging out with people collectively, trying to figure out ways to win with people. So the collective for me was no issue. Even in a team game, you can at least at a minimum dominate your zone or expand your territorial imperative or win your duels. And so for me, any kind of competition, I would embrace and jump into with both feet. So I like the 6, the position I was playing, the center halfback in a 1-3-3-4, because there were no restrictions on me. I could paint the field. I could literally run after the ball for 90 minutes from that position and not feel I've compromised my team because I'm out of position. So basically I was a ball hunter. And so for me, that was a perfect position for me to play in soccer. But I ran into problems when I played rugby because I was a scrum half, the quarterback of the team. And what I loved about the game was smashing into people. So anyone that knows rugby knows that the last place the scrum half should be is on the bottom of a ruck. Well, I was on the bottom of a ruck all the time because I couldn't wait to take someone's head off. And so invariably, I was at the bottom of a ruck. And so my coach kept telling me, Anson, this is crazy. You can't be in those situations. You got to be in a position when the ball comes out, you're delivering it. You're the playmaker. So, but my favorite part of the rugby game, just like my favorite part of the soccer game, was winning the ball, smashing into people, that sort of stuff. So for me, I was an uncoachable rugby, scrum half. But my temperament was to always be where the ball was, even if the other team had the ball. And I was going to take, that other, my opponent's head off.
Were you a coachable soccer player?
I I think so.
Your coach was Dr.
Marvin Allen. I mean,
Oh,
obviously, he must have liked me because I don't think he would have gone in and told Mr. Bill Kobe, the athletic
yeah.
director, to have me succeed him. So I think he liked me. I've always been a bit of a free spirit, so I consider myself coachable now. Does that count for anything?
That's all right. That's all right.
I'm
Progress in life,
well,
right?
I'm trying to learn how to play pickleball.
We played pickleball a few days ago.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So playing inline hockey about 3 or 4 years ago, I tore my left hip labrum, and I was playing hockey Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and soccer Monday, Wednesday, Friday, even into my 70s, and
Yeah.
my body was falling apart because of this torn hip labrum. So the only sport I could find to play was pickleball, because in pickleball, in doubles, you don't have to move. And I fell in love with the game because you don't really have to move much. So for me, that's my sport of choice, and I am coachable in pickleball.
And do you play in pairs?
I have to because I can't move.
Yeah.
I mean, I've played singles. I played singles against my son for a while, and just because my racket skills are good, I could compete with him. But now he just mops the floor with me. He's athletic, and he's in his early 30s, and I can't move. And so singles for me is,
Do you still feel the you want to beat your son to death on
yeah,
the
yes.
pickleball
Yeah.
court?
I have the gift of fury. If the ball's up in the air and he's anywhere near where I can hit him with the ball, I'm going after him. And he knows it. And whenever he plays against me in doubles, he explains to his doubles partner, by the way, when my dad's at the net, he doesn't have any patience in the dinking game. So at his first opportunity, he's going to send the ball at your head. Just make sure you duck it, because 80% of the time that ball's going out of bounds. So he advises his partner that I don't have the patience for dinking, which is the highest level of the game. I enjoy the violent elements of pickleball.
They say the fastest growing sport world in America.
I'll tell you, it's
Love
fun.
it.
It's fun. The runway's short. You don't have to be particularly good at anything to play the sport. The learning curve is radically good, so you'll become better and better and better even after a week or two of playing. And so, I think and certainly for my generation, we're all about to die. This is a great game to play while you're dying. Golf just bores me to death, and it's so frustrating. The runway for golf is so long. It takes you forever to become at least moderately good at it. In pickleball, the runway is short. You're going to be relatively good within 2, 3, 4 weeks.
Weeks, all right. So there's hope for us.
Yeah, no.
And your hip labrum?
Well, actually, I had the hip replaced, so I've got a titanium hip. And in fact, I think next week I see my hip surgeon for the final time, and I know he's going to bless me because I feel better and better and better. And I think he did an absolutely brilliant job.
So you said you used to play before the hip. You used to play soccer 3 times a week. So have you been active throughout your entire career?
Yeah. I've
because you look strong. You look.
Well, no, I love sports, and so for me, one of my good friends was playing in an over 50 division that competes for national championships in soccer, and he called me up one day and said, "Anson, come join the team." And I was thinking, there's no way I will enjoy it, because I just at 50, I just can't move anymore. So this is ridiculous. I'm not going to try. He says, "Please just come out one day." Okay. So I went out, and all of a sudden I noticed that, well, all the other guys can't move either. So in the over 50 division, we're all equally crippled, and every one of us has some sort of catastrophic injury in our history. So we're all either limping or, but acceleration is a memory, vertical jump is a memory. There's nothing left. So you're sort of move. In fact, when my kids used to come watch me play in the over 50 division, they'd spend the whole game laughing at me, laughing at my teammates, laughing at the game, just because it's so pathetically slow. But as a result, I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is okay. In other words, people aren't running by me or jumping over me. This is okay. And then I started playing every single summer in the age group national championship, right up through when I tore my hip labrum. And then, of course, I shifted into pickleball, which is
very nice. Yeah,
where I am now.
So I want to take you a few steps back to the early days, India. So what took your family to India? Because you were born in Bombay.
Yeah, my dad was an oil businessman. So basically every 3 years he was transferred. So we were in Bombay when I was born. A sister was born there. Then we moved to Calcutta. But between Bombay and Calcutta, the way the company worked is we would get 3 to 6 months of home leave. And this will It'll take you a while to unpack, but I'll speak it quickly so you can unpack it at your leisure. Both of my parents were born in mainland China. My mother's side of the family was there with American tobacco. That was the North Carolina side of the family. My father's side of the family was there with Standard Oil of New Jersey. So these were two of the most important American imperialists in China, tobacco and oil. So these were powerful families, my grandfathers on both sides, and both sets of grandparents got divorced. And my mother's father married my father's mother and bought a tobacco farm in Lewisburg, North Carolina. So whenever we went on home leave to Lewisburg, North Carolina, we were in effect visiting, in a way, both sets of grandparents. But it was just because they matched up.
Yep.
So I'd be wherever I was in the world. Where are you from? I'm from Lewisburg, North Carolina. So between Bombay and Calcutta, we're in Lewisburg, North Carolina. Between Calcutta and Nairobi, Kenya, we're in Lewisburg, North Carolina. Between Nairobi, Kenya and Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, we're in Lewisburg, North Carolina. In Addis Ababa is where I met my wife. She was the daughter of a gentleman who was the air attaché to the Ethiopian government. He was in the U.S. Air Force. And obviously, we were young. I was, 8, 9, 10 years old when we were in Addis Ababa. And then just through connections, eventually, she was a professional dancer in New York while I was in college here. And by this time, my parents were in Greenwich, Connecticut. And so I would go home while she was performing in New York. And we got reacquainted while I was a collegian here and then got married the summer I graduated. But basically, Bombay, Calcutta, Nairobi, Addis Ababa, then Singapore, Malaysia. And then we came back for the U.S., lived in White Plains for about 6 months. And then we headed to Brussels, Belgium. While in Belgium, I was sent to Saint-Jean in Fribourg. And then when my parents moved back to the United States, I was still in Switzerland. And then when I came to college, my parents were living comfortably in Greenwich, Connecticut, right outside New York City. And then I was in school. Well, actually, at first, St. Mary's, because as I mentioned to you earlier, I was rejected at all my first choice of schools. And then I transferred in here as a second semester freshman.
St. Mary's also your maybe free spirit didn't match the Texas spirit or the San Antonio spirit.
Yeah. I mean, this was during the Vietnam War, and the most glorious celebration we had is when we all sat in a room and found out what our draft number was. Because if your draft number was low, you were dead. You were heading to Vietnam. And I was there at St. Mary's. I was being trained as a forward observer in the artillery in the ROTC program there. And what was really cool about the grades we got as forward observers in the artillery is if we screwed up something on the test, we didn't get grades like A, B, C, D, F, just classic American academic curricula. We got grades like dead or alive. So if you screwed up, you were dead. Maybe just to let us know this is serious. So if you didn't get your work done, there were consequences to you failing something in, your basically your coordinates and sending an artillery shell in the right direction to hit someone else rather than you. So for me, it was an interesting experience in ROTC, but just through sheer luck, my draft number was high, so I didn't have to go to Vietnam.
Have you ever been back to these places in Ethiopia, in Singapore? Yeah.
Yep.
And bring some nostalgia to it? Like, are you
no
familiar
question.
with the places?
No question. I mean, I love Indian food because obviously everything about that culture I loved. I mean, I was raised by Anaya. I mean, we could afford servants, in all the places where I was growing up. And so I had this woman that took care of me, which is why to this day, even though I'm not a vegetarian, I prefer vegetarian Indian cuisine because she would pick the chicken out of my chicken curry because she was a vegetarian. So as a result, my instincts when I eat Indian food is to make sure it's all vegetarian. And that's my absolute favorite cuisine. Whenever my wife says, well, let's celebrate Father's Day or your birthday, what do you want? Well, I want Indian takeout. So yeah, let's get some Indian. And so I love it. So for me, that's my first choice of cuisines. And that's always stayed with me. So yes, I went back to Bombay.
Have you been back with your wife to Addis Ababa?
Yes, we went back there twice. We went back there once on a sort of a missionary venture where I was coaching a I think all of the professional men's coaches, I did coaching clinics for them on my first trip back. Second trip back, I think I trained their youth national team and their senior national team. So I've been back to Ethiopia twice. We obviously visited the different homes we lived in, but also Ethiopia has a special place in my heart, not just because I met my wife there, but because I went to an African school. I was the only white kid in an African school. And it's so funny. A lot of my dad's humor comes from that period when I was at this school, St. Joseph's in Addis Ababa, because I've only won 2 academic awards in my life. One of them was I won the English award at basically St. Joseph's in Addis Ababa. Why? Because I was the only kid in the school that spoke English at home. So, and who gave me the award? Haile Selassie, the Lion of Judah. So that was kind of cool to get an award from, someone the Rastafarians, think is basically a god, because Ethiopia is the only country in Africa that's never been colonized. So the African Union is in Addis Ababa. And for the reason that that's the only country in Africa that hasn't been colonized. And so there's a certain kind of spirit.
And some have tried.
What's that?
Some have tried.
Well, the Italians tried during the Second World War.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
But Ethiopia is a combination of a bunch of kingdoms coming together under one, no?
Yeah, if you go back far enough historically, and even today, I mean, Eritrea broke off. So the top strip of the point in Ethiopia is now a separate colony. I think Djibouti was maybe a part of Ethiopia back in the day. And obviously the Somalis were also part of that Horn of Africa kingdoms. But I can't give you enough detail to have credibility.
So you're living in all these different places. You make your way to North Carolina, which was always home to some degree. And you play soccer here and rugby. You become the men's coach. So how was that? You have the challenge of coaching these guys who you just played with. Were you accepted as the coach?
I assume so.
Because and I'm bringing that up because even today, when you have young managers like, I'm a soccer football fan. See like the Frank Lampards, the Steven Gerrards, who literally just played a couple seasons ago, and all the Xavi Alonsos, and now they have to coach these guys. So I always see it from a distance as a major step and a major challenge.
Actually, for me, I didn't feel it was that difficult because I was a very aggressive captain. And so if someone messed up, they heard from me immediately. I've never been shy. I mean, it's interesting. I'm an introvert, but you can be an introvert and not be shy. I am not shy. So I was a very bold, aggressive captain. If someone wasn't getting it done, they heard from me immediately. So it was a very easy transition because all I was doing is, when I was the captain, I was barking from the field. When I became coach, I'm doing the same thing, but now I'm just barking from the sideline. Yep. And so for me, it was a relatively easy transition, but also I never put pressure on myself because this was never my ambition. This was income so I could pay for my way through law school. So I never put, enormous pressure on myself. And I ended up just loving coaching. In fact, you'll love this, you pickleballers. We formed a pickleball team this summer, and it's made up of former players of mine that played for me that are living in the community who are almost as old as I am. Why? Because I was as young as they were when I was coaching them. And so these 3 guys, one of them was a great goalkeeper for me. Another one was my leading scorer my first year, is also on my team. Another one is English. He's a Moorhead scholar from England, and he now lives in this community. And these 3 guys are my 3 pickleball teammates on a 4-man pickleball team. And so I just love hanging out with them.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, I was very comfortable coaching the men. And was I an absolutely brilliant coach? No, I didn't know anything about coaching. I mean, I knew about as much as someone that knows something about playing. And you try to translate that into coaching. And I certainly have a lot of background on how this transition goes because I was hired by U.S. Soccer years ago to become one of their coaching instructors to give licenses and badges for people. And what I would, tell people that were great players that here's going to be your challenge when you start coaching. You're going to have incredible credibility when you come in because of your playing resume. And what's going to happen is you're going to slowly but surely lose your credibility. if you don't have the ability to really motivate and organize practice well and, basically check all the boxes. And those of you that have no real playing resumes, you're going to come into this environment with absolutely no respect. And then your challenge is to improve it. And so looking back from my perspective of someone that trains coaches, I came in because obviously I was a dominant player as a collegian. And so then obviously, unless you sort of learn something about the game or learn to coach it or try to, I guess, learn more about your profession, you're going to slowly but surely lose credibility. And so I was a committed student of the game. So, I'm one of these guys that loves to read. So I was reading all the business books. Everyone was talking about how the most critical element in any team is culture. So I was learning about, aspects of trying to create a positive culture. And I was doing everything I could to learn about the game. So I was a very aggressive student learner of the game to try to make sure that my coaching credibility matched my playing performance. And that's a challenge. That's a challenge when you are a Lampard being in with a great reputation as a player at the club and then having to obviously replicate your playing performance with your coaching results. And that's not easy. But I had enough of a runway to have some credibility. And then what really benefited me was 3 years later when the athletic director here said, Anson, there's a women's club on campus that's petitioned for varsity status. And back in, 1972, Richard Nixon pushed through Title IX, basically the law that says you've got to spend as much money on your women as you do on your men in an institution like this that gets federal aid. And so I think he was really concerned about the lack of balance in his athletic department between men and women's teams. And so when this very well-organized club petitioned for varsity status, he wanted me to vet them. So he says, Anson, come on out and let's watch this team play together. And I said, sure. And I went out there. And at the end of the game, he said, Anson, what do you think? I said, well, you know what? They're well-organized. They're committed. And now I'm shilling for the team to become a varsity, but also shilling for the coach to coach the team because I thought he did a great job. And then no sooner did I finish that statement about how impressed I was with them. And he says, well, Anson, if you'll coach both teams, we'll make your part-time men's position full-time. I still had 6 courses left in my law degree. Usually you finish law school in 3 years. But I was taking a course shy each semester to basically coach. So I was going into my 4th year of law school. Most of us, of course, finish in 3. Now I'm coaching 2 teams, the men and the women. And I'm getting 4 to 6 hours sleep at night. I don't know about you guys, but I just can't function without sleep. And I'm just frazzled. And finally, I come home one day and I said, honey, I'm so sorry. I know your dream is to retire on a yacht in the Mediterranean, but I've decided I'm going to coach for a living. I absolutely love it. And then my wife, who is wonderful, she threw her arms around me and says, Anson, don't worry about it. You love this. You are happy. We are going to be happy. We're not going to be rich, but we're going to be happy. So she was behind this 100%. And then from...
Did your dad find an attorney?
Well, my dad was very angry with me. 6 courses to go on the law degree and I don't finish. He was very, very upset. And then it's so funny we're talking about this now because my wife and I are house cleaning right now. We're going through all these boxes of letters and papers, and there's a couple great letters in there from my dad. And you can see the transition from when he's really pissed at me to now he's giving me advice on coaching because now he can see that I do enjoy it. I'm okay at it, so, it's not an absolute disaster. And now he's in with both feet because obviously he's proud of his son. But there was a period when he just couldn't believe, with 6 courses to go, basically less than a year. Yeah. I could have finished it one semester if I was aggressive. He just couldn't believe the stupidity of that choice. But looking back, it was a wonderful choice because I am just supremely happy.
So you had that introduction to the women's team. Now you're coaching both men's and women's. So when did you finally make that how did you decide to make that full transition to the women's side?
Basically, I had a chance to pioneer a sport, and I knew I did. And part of what gave me all the weaponry to be very aggressive and effective at coaching the women was my experience coaching the men as such a young coach. So a lot of the women's game was starting up, and we were the first women's varsity in the South. So I sort of had a head start on a lot of my opponents just because of my head start. And obviously, I'm very aggressive and hardworking. And so the women's team just took off. I had opportunities on the women's side I would never have had in the men's side. On the women's side, I was an early candidate to become the national coach. And that was incredibly exciting because actually, during the period when I was coaching the men and the women, I was also the women's national team coach. I was hired to coach the women's national team in 1986.
Which it didn't mean what it means today.
No, I mean, back then, we had never won a game in international competition when I was hired. And then 5 years later, we were world champions. So during that stretch when I was their coach, we took them from a sort of an also ran in the world to the top of the table. And so that was exciting. So these are the different reasons why I felt that the women's game was where I should stay.
Yep.
And even though I loved the rivalry games on the men's side, and I loved so many aspects of coaching the men, including my pickleball team now. These are wonderful guys that I'm playing with. I love so many different elements of the men's side, but the women's side was where I really thought I could make a difference and make a difference early and have opportunities. Again, as I said earlier, I would never have had on the men's side. So for me, in '88, I went to the AD, and in sort of a conspiracy with my two assistants, I had a men's assistant and a women's assistant. We literally took the budget, cut it in half. I chatted with a wonderful men's assistant I had by the name of Elmar Bolovich, and he agreed to work.
Still coaches, or did until recently.
He did.
Right?
Well, he was coaching collegiately even after he left UNC at Creighton for a while. But he was a magnificent partner for me on the men's side. But he agreed to be the head men's coach on an assistant coach's salary. And the budget we literally cut in half. So if the two budgets were 200,000, he had 100,000, I had 100,000, then we went to town. And so we divided everything up equally. And so it was obviously some of the men's players are still pissed at me for leaving.
Yep.
And they remind me of this all the time, by the way. It's exhausting. You can't coach two teams. It's absolutely exhausting. And
do you remember what it was though? Like the day-to-day working with female athletes for the first time, how different that was?
I was a disaster. I went to a boys' boarding school, as I mentioned earlier in Fribourg. So I've never been around girls or women in my life. In fact, the joke I tell whenever I'm publicly speaking is when I was in this boys' boarding school, the closest I came to a woman is when I had the leading female role in the school play my senior year. So that was how close I got to a woman. I acted like one in a play. So I had no experience with this. And then when I came in here, actually, when I was in school here, 80% of the population, maybe even 85 or 90% were men. And we didn't admit females as freshmen. So the first time a woman could come onto this campus is if she had transferred in from Meredith College in Raleigh or UNC Greensboro. And Greensboro back in those days was not a co-ed school. It was a women's school. So there weren't very many women on campus. And another thing, I tell people all the time about my transition into basically understanding women is there's this one woman on campus I thought was, the coolest thing. And I asked her out on a date and she refused. And I was just so taken aback. I retired from dating permanently. And I even tell the story about I go home and my dad, of course, is in a full panic because he's got this boys' boarding school looming in my background. And he's, talking about the most wonderful thing in his life is his relationship with my mother. And I could tell he was stressed out of his mind. So I literally married the next woman to walk through the door, which is, of course, the woman I'm currently married to. But yeah, my transition to coaching women was very clunky because, again, I'm an introvert. I knew nothing about the culture. And then what's interesting is they helped me transform myself into someone that could coach them. And simple things like what I shared earlier. I mean, Susan Ellis didn't want to be called Ellis. She wanted to be called Susan. Okay, Susan it is. So, but there was this transition in all these different areas where I was just not doing things the right way. And
could you be as aggressive as you were, boys?
No. That was one area that I had to temper completely. But also I was misinformed, which is why, some of the radical movements for all the right and noble reasons are crippling if they are not based on truth. So radical feminism in the early 70s was telling all of us that men and women are the same. The only reason we have any differences is because culture pushes us in different directions. And so there's a difference out here because culture has pushed men in this direction and women in this direction. And the reason they have this as a platform is because the last thing they want is to be treated unfairly or unequally. So if you make any sort of concession about differences, you're sort of throwing the door open for inequality. So radical feminism, when I was in school, was telling us that men and women were the same. And I was thinking, thank goodness, because I don't know anything about women and I know a lot about men. I've been hanging out with them, but also I've been inside the skull of a male. I know everything about men. So I'm thinking, thank goodness that, we're the same. And so I'm coaching the women just like the men, and I'm not an idiot. I can tell this isn't working. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And so slowly but surely, my women are training me on how to lead them. And so I came to the conclusion men and women are different. And I'm still, learning differences.
And I want to touch on this, how maybe the X's and O's of the game have evolved tremendously in the last few decades and they keep evolving. What has stayed the same from your team back then, that the girls, the players were leading you on how to lead them, and what, to this day, the 2023 season?
The challenges and issues on the women's side are still the same. The way we raise our women is different than the way we raise our men. If you're a young man and you're competitive, you're put on a pedestal. If you're a young woman and you're competitive, you are excoriated by your own culture. And so the way we're raising our girls and young women is to genuflect and be sweet and kind and nice and quiet. And we raise our men differently. So the challenge we have, and this was my challenge even way back when, is to create a culture where we're embracing basically competition. So that's one area that hasn't changed. And it's still the case, despite all the new equalities that are occurring in the gender wars. That's still an issue because it is a transitional element. And the other piece that's really interesting and sort of bizarre is men's teams. It's easier to develop a leadership voice on a men's team. And men have the wonderful combination of incredibly low standards for each other, and we're not sensitive. And that's an incredible environment for bonding. So if you and I are hanging out together, my standard for you is so low, you're going to clear this low bar. Your standard for me is so low, I'm going to clear that low bar. So we don't have any issues with each other. And then if one of us makes some sort of social mistake, we probably won't even notice it. Why? Because we are as dull as bricks in terms of assessing, sensitivity or trying to become a victim over something. You know what I'm saying? Or taking some sort of statement you make the wrong way. You'll make a statement. Let's assume it's an insulting statement. I might take it a completely different way, even though you're trying to insult me, but it just doesn't work because it misses me, because I can't even sort out that you're attacking me. So
You're describing the average male locker room.
They're exactly right. So that's a wonderful environment for bonding.
Yeah.
Women have the incredibly challenging environment of incredibly high standards for each other and incredible sensitivity. So it's very difficult to lead. It's very difficult for women to lead women because they know what their teammates are thinking of them while they're trying to lead them. And of course, then the tone sucked. The words you used weren't appropriate. I wasn't in the mood to hear anything from you. I mean, it could be 60 million different things going on, which makes it very difficult for a female leader to be as aggressive as we would be in our environments, just because of the low bar and also the lack of sensitivity. So the two elements that are still the case now, as they were way back when I started coaching women, was embracing competition and then being effective leaders, verbal leaders. And those are the two challenges that still exist on the women's side.
And culturally, is there anything that again, that you've implemented then that stays the same today in terms of the team culture?
There are three things that, in my opinion, have put us in a really good position for this team that I coach here at UNC. One is the competitive cauldron. And in fact, if you look on that wall over there, this was, some collection of journalists ranking the top dynasties in all sports for all time, men and women, pro and amateur. And what they drilled into when they had us as the highest ranking female team of all time was the competitive cauldron, which is my effort to try to let the women that we're coaching know that we are embracing competition here. So I know that the way you guys have raised, if you were incredibly aggressive and competitive, you were excoriated, not here. If you're an alpha female, you have come home, because the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, if you're an alpha female, is home for you. And you're going to love it here, because if you start kicking everyone's rear end in, you're going to have a pat on the back, and you're going to be fully supported. And so that's the foundation of what we did from the beginning. And actually,
The competitive cauldron.
Yeah, the cauldron. And that was a piece actually that I think the United States, when I was coaching the team, we took from never winning a game in the world to being world champions by 1991, because the mentality of the American athlete in women's soccer is extraordinary. And even to this day, that's our quality. I mean, the French are as athletic, the Germans are more tactical, the Japanese are more technical. You can take almost any aspect of the game, and we can find other countries out there that are better than the United States. But the one quality that still separates us is our mentality. So this is something that I baked into the national team from 1986 until 1994 when I stepped back. And it's something that's baked into the American playing personality on the women's side that still gives us an incredible edge. So does that mean we're a shoe-in to win this World Cup? Of course not. I mean, what's interesting about a single game series to win any sort of event is the precariousness of it. In the NBA, you have best of 7. So if you have one bad game, you're okay. You just have to win 4 out of 7. In a single game series, you can be eliminated. You can outshoot a team 40-1 on that other team's one shot. You're taken out. And of course, the journalists who want to write their own story talk about how brilliant the strategy was for this one team to take one shot and win. Of course, no. It was an incredible gamble to sit back and, play off the counter and all these other different ways that we rationalize success on the side.
Or a great 93rd minute corner kick that was practiced in training.
Exactly right. I mean, so yeah, it's just ridiculous. Yeah. And so, I'm saying this knowing that the World Cup's ahead of us. And so I think the United States is still formidable. But if we don't win, I'm not going to lose faith in where we are and where we're going. I just think we have an incredible culture, and the culture is what's been baked into it is mentality, which still separates the United States.
For you, over the years, with the development of the game itself, tactics of the game, the rules that have evolved and changed within the game, was it difficult for you to keep, if you will, with the changes? Because, even you always see coaches criticize for not, maybe older coaches for not keeping up with the younger coaches, with the evolvement of the game. So is that something that was always, in the front of your brain to always stay on top of?
To some extent, yes, because I think all of us have to continue to educate ourselves, and to feel that you've arrived is ridiculous, because there are all kinds of things that happen in the game that have tweaked it and made it better. And there are things you can learn to make your own environment better. So no one can afford to stay in one place. But one thing that I was very fortunate with is the way I made decisions on the way we were going to play is I came to the conclusion of the sort of players and teams I hated to play against. I've always hated to play against teams that pressured. You give me a half a second, I'm going to make a good decision with the ball. You don't give me a half a second, I'm going to struggle to make a good decision. So even from day one, when I was coaching my collegiate team here at UNC and also the U.S. women's national team, when I was appointed in 1986. We've played a high pressing game. And then, of course, and you know this because you've been involved in the game, we've gone through different periods in the men's game where, it's a low block and then it's a mid block and then it's a lower line of confrontation. And now, of course, and I don't know if it was Klopp or maybe it was Barcelona, all of a sudden teams that press are now vogue. But there was a stretch forever when they weren't. When, certainly classic great teams in Germany would play in a mid block, between the top of the D and the tangent of the center circle. And that's the way most teams played. So you would have an area where you could play make from, and then you would send an extra player from the defense into midfield to create numbers up around the ball. And then you'd have overlaps or underlaps and blah, 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 blah. We've been pressing from day one because that's who I would hate to play against.
Yeah.
I hate to play against someone that is basically dogging me for 90 minutes. I hate that. So I designed a team that I would hate to play against. So what does that team play like? We didn't play and genuflect on the altar of the 4-4-2. I hated the 4-4-2. So we played a 1-3-4-3, which meant we were pressing with our 3 against the other team's back 4. And originally, when we won that World Cup in 1991, we marked with 2 and played with a deep sweeper. Then that evolved in my collegiate game to playing a semi-flat back 1-3-4-3, which meant we weren't marking, but we were trying to compact space. So the distance between the center forward and the center back was like 30 meters. And so now there's only one space the other team could attack in, which is a ball over the top. But we took care of that because my goalkeeper was well outside the penalty area as basically a keeper sweeper. So basically, my take on the game was so different than everyone else in the world, and so different even to this day collegiately. There are very few college teams that press like we do because everyone has these models on the men's game that I don't think apply in the women's game as
So
well.
is it a different game?
Yeah. Yeah.
Same rules, different game.
It is a different game. Tactically, there are some differences, and obviously the games are getting closer and closer together as the women's game evolves. But originally, a pressing game benefited you because the women technically couldn't navigate the pressure that a men's team could. But what's happened on the men's side, which is sort of interesting, is, well, we can't navigate pressure as well on the men's side because we're so good, so we'll back off. Now what they're sorting out is with incredible energy, a men's team can press to good effect because now they're benefiting from a more effective press. So we've always had the philosophy that the women's game hasn't evolved to the same level as the men's game, so pressing will benefit us. So against most women's teams, if you press effectively, they're not going to play through the lines. Now, obviously, the men's game is becoming so good, there are almost no truly elite teams in the Champions League that don't play through the lines. They all do. They all have the skill set, even against high-pressing teams, to get through all the lines. And that's obviously a very sophisticated way to play. But in the women's game, it's still pretty hard for most teams to play through the lines against an effective high press. So we've done that from, sort of day one. And
But also on the men's team, like if we take out Champions League, the Champions League teams, every other team would struggle, right? Like if you watch like lower division teams or even not top 5 Premier League teams, everyone struggles.
You're correct. But so I guess we were ahead of ourselves in pressing way back in the early 80s before it was popular on the men's side. Because basically the men's game is the university for the women's game. And so I have no hesitancy to share that because it is. I mean, so the top league in the world for anyone to follow and study is the EPL. The average EPL team is extraordinary. Not that there aren't great teams in, Spain and Italy and Germany. No, of course there are great teams there. But top to bottom, the separation between the top teams in the EPL and the bottom are a lot closer than in Spain or Italy or Germany or France. And so for me, that's the best environment for all of us to watch, to continue to learn, even on the women's side, to play the highest level game effectively.
But to play your game effectively, as you have since the 80s, you need committed players, you need coachable players, and you need people that want to win and beat the other team to death for 90 minutes. Because if someone doesn't, then kind of breaks the whole team apart, no?
You're right.
And especially in a pressing game. Does it come down to recruiting? You know, we were speaking about this room that the recruits, this is one of their final stops. But does it come down to recruiting the right individuals? You know, I always read about, whether in business or in sports, that recruiting is the biggest hurdle, the biggest challenge. Right.
You are absolutely spot on. We're allowed to recruit 7 kids a year. But back in the old days, we were only allowed to recruit 5 kids a year. And when I did the math, what I realized when I was recruiting 5 kids a year, in a typical recruiting class of 5, 1 player would be better than I thought, 2 would about be what I thought, 1 would be worse than I thought, 1 would be so bad they wouldn't get on the field in 4 years. So if you look at this in terms of business percentages, that's only a 60% hit rate. That's not very good. That's not very good. And so, yep, recruiting is a nightmare because you're never sure that this kid that you've picked up, that you've seen play at an incredibly high level, is going to continue to improve. Because a part of our conversation has been about, you know, continuing to get better and better and better. You can't come in at one level and stay there and hope to contribute. So you got to come in wherever you came in with. You've got to continue to live on a never-ending ascension. That's a cliche we use. We want our kids to get, you know, quicker, faster, stronger, more technical, smarter, and we want their progression to be visible, which is why we keep so much data to show them that they're getting better, to inspire them to work harder, to continue to get better. But that is a huge issue. A huge issue is bringing in the right people, and not just bringing in the right people for athletic reasons and soccer reasons, but bringing in the right people for character reasons, which is why after the competitive Cauldron, the most important thing for us in terms of our long-term success is our core values. We have 13 core values that we expect the players to live by, and those core values are critical for our success. And we need buy-in. We need these kids to believe that this is the correct way to live and behave, and then create a culture that, you know, treats people well, and basically a culture that's well led. As I was sharing earlier, the huge challenge in women's teams where, you know, it's so difficult to get a woman to lead verbally because she knows what's going through the minds of all of her teammates if she's bossing them around the field. And the standard a woman will have for another woman in terms of leadership is extraordinarily high, higher than we men have for each other. So you have all these different challenges on the women's side that are critical. So yeah, principle-centered living. You want to basically have a culture where we all agree on a certain a level and standard of behavior. And then obviously the Cauldron, which accelerates your development on the soccer field. And the final piece, and this is a very important piece, especially now with social media and the tribal wars that are going on in America politically, you're going to try to get everyone's personal narrative to the truth as fast as possible. Everyone has a personal narrative. Our personal narratives are designed to protect us from pain and accountability. So what we all have excuses for all of our failures. And why do we have that? Because we're all relatively fragile creatures. And if we didn't have all these excuses, we'd all be jumping off bridges. So we have these excuses forgiving ourselves for this, that, and the other thing. So what we construct is we construct these personal narratives that are nowhere near the truth. I had an opportunity to teach a course at UNC this past spring. And one of the lectures I was giving was on self-awareness. It's really interesting. Only 85% of the population are self-aware. I'm sorry, only 15% of the population are self-aware. 85% of the population have no self-awareness.
So does self-awareness mean that I'm aware of these narratives that I'm setting in place as defense mechanisms?
Well, you don't think they're defense mechanisms. You think those are reality.
So that would
And
be
anyone that has any real clue looking at you knows that you are building your whole life on these false narratives, which is going to make it very difficult for you to change because you have excuses for this and excuses for that and reasons for this, which are excuses, and reasons for that in your own mind. And one of the main jobs for all of us in coaching in this modern era is to drive these narratives to the truth. And of course, what happens, across the spectrum in American politics, but also in American media, is we all gravitate towards a media that feeds our personal narrative, whether or not it's the truth. So thank goodness Fox News was sued for almost $1 billion for their false narrative that they were basically sharing as the truth. And we have a similar sort of challenge within our own narratives for the athletes that we recruit.
So how do you try and get to that truth? And so you said you're trying to get to that truth with every athlete as quickly as possible.
Yeah, because they come in and what you want to sort out is whether or not their personal narrative is the truth. Because as I mentioned earlier, 15% of the population do have an effective narrative. And the reason you want their narrative to the truth as fast as possible is you want them to improve. And if they're using, these different excuses for why they haven't changed or gotten better, or they've got this excuse for not starting or this excuse for not playing or not traveling, then, well, there's nothing I can do. The coach hates me, or, the reason I don't play is because he feels this is the most important thing about the game, but I disagree. I think this is the most important thing. And he doesn't recognize this thing in me, blah, 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 blah. And then, of course, then there's this circular narrative between the player and usually the parents, where the parents aren't even at practice. They don't see their little darling having a rear end handed to her in every minute of every practice. And so when the kid calls home, the kid isn't saying, oh, by the way, I just had my ass handed to me today again in practice. That's not what the kid is saying. Well, honey, how did it go? Oh, mom, dad, it was great. I was really good. I scored a couple of goals and this and that and the other thing. And of course, if you were there watching, you would have seen this little kid just, squashed like a grape. But that's not the narrative she's telling her parents. So now the parents are feeding back to her when they see that, oh my gosh, you're not starting or you're not playing. They are incensed because the basis for their opinion on whether or not their kid should be playing is based on the information their kid is giving them, which is a false narrative. And so now there's this circular connection between a parent that's constructed a false narrative based on misinformation that's now feeding this false narrative back into their kid, who's now also becoming incensed and enraged over either lack of starting, a lack of playing time, or whatever. Every now and again, you will have a superstar parent that completely gets that their kid, is off the rails. And then, good luck, honey. Okay, I'm sorry you're not playing, but bummer, we'll fight harder or work harder. I mean, but those parents are gold. And when you finally get one of those, you want to wrap your arms around them. But they're so incredibly rare because they're trying to rationalize. They've never seen their daughter fail. Their daughter, what they've seen their whole lives, has been the best player on every team she's ever played on. Oftentimes the best player in the state she comes from. Oftentimes as well, the best player east of the Mississippi or the best player west of the Mississippi. And every now and again, the best player in the country. This is what the parent is used to seeing. And now they're not seeing training, but now they have an opinion on their daughter, even though for us, if you want to get on the field, compete. We have 28 different competitive categories. You are ranked. You will see in 28 different categories where you rank in everything. You will see where your fitness rank is in the beat. You'll see, where your agility ranking is, where your speed is. Every half field game you play, there's a winner and a loser. Are you the albatross or do you win most of these games? We will have a draft before our 4v4 tournament where the players in your team are picking you to play with them or not. Are you a high draft pick or do the girls not want to play with you? I mean, so there are all these different measures where
they get the truth served to them, whatever that truth is.
The truth is there.
Every week, every session.
Every night, the analytics team sends out a ranking from that day's practice. If we have 5 different competitive categories, they're ranked in each 5. And then the analytics team also looks at the 5 and says, you know what? I think this one has more relevance than the other 4. I'm going to give this a 2X factor, and the rest of them will have 1X factors in the algorithm to decide who was the best in practice.
You worked extremely hard to set a culture and try and cement a team culture here. And then you work hard to try and recruit the best players for that culture. And then you have how many players on average year on the team? 20?
My favorite number is 30.
30.
I like 26 field players and 4 goalkeepers.
So you have 30 players on the team. Sorry.
Ideally.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes we have more, sometimes we
Mhm.
have less, but 30 for me is the perfect number with 26 field players, 4 goalkeepers. And you'll
Yeah.
love this because this feeds into the sort of thing you're interested in for this podcast. Every single day,
Yeah.
6 kids are out. 6 kids on average every single day are out. Some of them catastrophically, ACL tear or some sort of severe knee injury or an Achilles rupture.
It's just expected. Every year there's going to be
Well,
something.
we don't want it to be expected.
Yeah.
We want to be able to manage it so we can take that 6 to maybe 2 or 3. And ideally to have nothing catastrophically, any player out for catastrophic reasons, ACLs or Achilles tendon ruptures. And so that's the direction we would love to go in. But that's again why a 30-player roster for us is critical. And by the way, we believe in substitution. A lot of programs don't. A lot of programs try to stay as close to FIFA rules as possible. That's not us. We're going to play a high pressing game. So we're going to rotate players as we high press. Now, does this mean we always high press all the time? Yes, we do. And do we always substitute? Well, if we don't think we can win some games by having the substitution drop off at the end of last season, we had 7 players during the national championship run that played 90 minutes. So there are only 4 players that we rotated all.
Yeah.
But ideally for, injury management reasons, but also protection of players reasons, because we are high pressing, we're going to try to rotate players.
So on that point, just to hone in on it, so, the players, I'm assuming also with your competitive mentality and everyone trying to climb up the ranks on the analytics every single day, players work hard and players work hard every day. In terms of injury management, so is there a team in place that it's their job to try and maintain the players the best way possible, trying to keep everyone as fit and healthy as possible?
Yes, we have a trainer whose full-time responsibility during our season is us, because we also teach athletic training. She also has 2 to 3 assistants that also work with us, and these are students. So the woman that runs this for us is a full-timer with a degree, obviously, in physical therapy and athletic training. And then she has 2 or 3 assistants that help us with taping ankles and or learning their craft by also being a part of the structure. We also have a strength coach who has his staff, and he is responsible right now, because I'm not allowed by NCAA rules to coach my kids. He's in the weight room with them right now. He's
Like during the summer. During the
Yes,
summer.
during the
Yeah,
summer.
during the
Correct.
summer.
So those rules are in place for him. So we have those sorts of teams set up. And actually, you'll be impressed to hear that I've also pulled in a former professional player of mine who had an ACL tear playing professionally. They came back here to rehab because she's actually from Chapel Hill. And she is a player we've just hired that at this month, she's just been hired. And her job is to basically help our trainer and our strength coach in return to play. So if we're having practice and we've got, let's say, 6 kids out, she's working with the 6 kids. Some obviously can't do anything. The ones that have just torn an ACL, they're more or less watching practice. But then there are a couple kids, based on how close they are to return to play, she's working with them, doing functional work with the ball or some functional fitness work.
So the one thing I was going to ask you about the number of players on the roster in the squad is, you set the culture, find the right fit for the culture, but you're still left with a pool of players that not everyone gets to play. And those players are here to play, here to compete, they're here to win, which is the reason why you brought them. But they might sit on the bench. They might be one of the 40% or the 20% that doesn't get to play at all for 4 years.
Right.
How do you manage those, I'll use the word egos, personalities, characters on the team?
Well, obviously, anyone with any understanding of culture will tell you that how you treat them. And they still have to be embraced. They're still a part of helping you construct an extraordinary culture. They are needed. And so if you're playing 11v11, you need those kids. And if you have a 30-player roster and 6 kids are out, you're going to need almost every player to replicate the kind of training environment you need in order for the team to continue to improve and the players on the team to improve. So that's a part of the way you treat everyone.
Yep.
So they have to feel respected and embraced and valued. And there are a lot of different ways you can do that. Developing individual and personal relationships with all of the players is critical. And then to try to create environments where they know that you're interested in their development. And so a leadership thing that we're going to implement this fall is something we call loving critics. A loving critic is someone that loves you, but is critical because they love you so much they want you to get better. So they're not afraid to critique you to help you get to another level.
So this is a new innovation?
Well, it's not so much a new innovation. It's another way of saying the same sort of thing. Because, yeah, you want a team that's connected in the most aggressive way, in a very loving way, but that exists on most women's teams. And most women's teams, they do have this connective piece. The piece they're missing is the leadership piece, the critic piece. So what we want to do is we want to create a culture where a woman on the team, hearing a leader on the team try to drive her to the promised land and not take that as some sort of insult or criticism. No, the reason I'm sharing this with you is I think you can be better, but you'll have to do this. So I love you and I want you to get better, but this part of your game, we've got to improve a little bit.
I'm seeing the potential in you.
Correct. And if you just tweak this thing a little bit, you're going to improve, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you're trying to create a collection of loving critics, which is your leadership council, because they're responsible for obviously the core values, the culture, but also during the games, performance, just like the coaches are. And the coaches also have to figure out a way for the player to sense that I care about you, but that's not good enough. I know where you want to go. That's not acceptable. So, and one of the best ways to coach a player is to send her to the bench. Okay, you're not doing this, and I think you can. I'm going to play so-and-so. But let's see if we can solve that this week to get you back on the field for maximum minutes. So you're using carrot and stick all the time to try to drive performance. And one of my favorite compliments of all time was actually relatively recently, maybe 2 years ago, because obviously I'm in touch with all of our pros on a regular basis. And the pros, obviously, they're in environments where some of them are struggling to get on the field. And I was talking to this one, and she was really upset because she couldn't get on the field. And she was very angry with her professional coach. And she says, Anson, after I played for you, I thought I could play for anyone, with the implication you were so hard on me. Yeah. I didn't think there was another coach in the world I could play for that would be as hard on me as you were. So, in her own mind, she was thinking, I'm perfectly prepared to go anywhere.
Yeah.
And she said, but through your criticism, I could feel your love. And that was just a wonderful statement that she made. And I really appreciated that because that's what we also have to do as loving critics. Yep. You're going to hear this criticism, and there are all sorts of different ways that you can react. But I have to figure out a way to lead you through the conduit of you knowing that I still love and care about you, even though this part's going to hurt a bit. So that's the leadership challenge.
I loved being here with you. And it's an incredible, inspirational room. So thank you very much for your time. It was a great interview. I wish you guys luck this coming season. I hope you beat them to death. So thank you for being here on episode 29. Albert Anson Dorrance the fourth.
There you go.
Thank you very much.
I enjoyed it myself. Thank you.
Pleasure.
If you liked this video and you want to see more, make sure to subscribe below and don't forget to hit the notification button.